Where did you grow up and what brought you to theater?
Sure. So I grew up in San Francisco in the 80s and 90s, a very different San Francisco than there is now. It's kind of pre-tech boom San Francisco. My dad was an actor and performer. My mom was a teacher. And it was very much like this milieu of all these people who had moved to San Francisco in the 70s to create art. My dad's British, so he had met my mom in England when they were creating a community theater in London, and they came back out. And San Francisco was a happening place. So I grew up in this sort of nurturing world of artists and activists, and also just there was a lot more working and middle class people in San Francisco back then.
At the time.
It was just a lot more affordable. There people could yeah. So that was it was a very kind of a very open and cool place. It kind of was between kind of being a working class port town, and then it was like had the whole 60s thing, but then that had kind of moved into more like 70s, 80s, like arts and middle class, and there was all these neighborhoods that are so close. So I, from a young age, was curious in going around to different neighborhoods, and you could take the bus, or I could get on my bike and go to different neighborhoods and meet different people and interact with people from different backgrounds. And so that was really formative. And then I went to Northwestern University and began studying ethnography and in the performance studies department. And at first I would just go and get on a random stop on the L and go down into Chicago and get off and go around and talk to strangers, essentially, because I just felt like the sort of the bubble of Northwestern, which is in the suburb of Evanston, wasn't interesting enough. And I wanted to bring all these stories that I felt like weren't getting told. So I didn't really know what I was doing, and then I stumbled into performance studies, and they're like, "Oh, there's a methodology, there's a practice. This is how you do it. This is how you gain trust. This is how you do it transparently. This is how you get permission. This is how you build relationships."
Do you remember what
And
drove you to that first? Like what was the impetus like to say cuz that's very unique. I mean, that's very like
yeah, well, I think, I mean, I joke. My friend still tells me I joke back in when I was like in my early 20s. I would say like, well, I'm not totally a theater guy, and my friend is like 20 years later, like, hey, theater guy, here now, theater guy, I'm coming to your 10th play this week. Good job holding the line. And I think what I meant was I was really interested in theater that was contemporary, that brought in the way people talk now, that brought in stories from the streets. There was some people that were really formative to me, like seeing Anna Devere Smith's work.
hmm,
Danny Hawk had a show, Jails, Hospitals, and Hip Hop, which was this bravura solo show that was less journalistic, but was so clearly, finely observed, closely observed, and really nuanced. And that really spoke to me of like, can you portray these characters with such nuance and detail that you feel like you're actually meeting these people. So yeah, that was kind of my interest. And I did some plays and worked on my craft just as an actor, but I really got into this notion of creating stories. And I had professors like Mary Zimmerman, who also taught classes where we would bring non-traditional pieces of literature and create performance out of them. So poems or
hmm.
Arabian Nights, and we'd have to pick one, and I would often take one and then put a very contemporary slant on it. And she loved that. So yeah, I was always interested in like how do we I grew up as very much in the backstage of theater and going to my dad's rehearsals and all of that, so I knew the language of it, and I was just really interested in bringing kind of this freshness, this what is really happening in the world
Hmm.
on stage.
Do you remember any of your father's performances? Do you remember watching anyone in particular?
Yeah, I mean, so my dad, he studied at Birmingham University and then studied mime in Paris for 2 years. So he's an incredibly physical performer. And a lot of his shows were kind of part of this whole new vaudeville movement with like Bill Irwin, and he was in shows. He was a clown in the Pickle Family Circus, and then he toured with Cirque du Soleil. But as this type of European clown, where it's very much character based and sort of
Hmm.
physical comedy. And then he also, I mean, he was in The Lion King on Broadway. He originated that role, which is a very physical piece of theater. And so I there was always just, and he always had, and you'll see here, it, we have it's very normative to have a huge mirror
Yeah.
because we both work a ton in front of the mirror to try to locate the essence of the character we're portraying and having this constant feedback. So my early rehearsals when I'm working on stuff is I work in front of a mirror, and I
Hmm.
have to start to see somebody else that's not me in the mirror to know I'm on the right track.
That's fascinating. So this let's move into that then. As far as your, it's like how your process. How you've done about five different of these shows by now, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you count like the sort of the minor quick ones, I think this is like my eighth, but I've had like five. The first two were kind of like learning what I was doing, and then I've had five that have toured widely.
So have you followed, like, you kind of learned the process for what you kind of wanted to create, so you've kind of created the process as you've gone along?
Yeah, so it's gotten much more professional, I would say. I started out when I was 22, right out of college, or when I was in college. I got a grant to go around the world from a Circumnavigators Club
Wow.
grant, and I had to write a report for them. But I knew I wanted to create a my first show, so I was hanging out with surfers in South Africa and factory workers in Vietnam, and getting stopped by kids in Mombasa, Kenya, and telling me that I looked like Eminem, and then having to freestyle rap to get out of getting jumped or whatever, and so I cut my teeth just like out in the world. And then my first big show that toured a lot was this. I lived in Nigeria for a year as a Fulbright scholar studying oil politics,
Interesting.
and created a show called Things They Happen, which was all about that, where I was hanging out with the militants and the creeks, the oil workers, and the funky honky tonk oil bars, talking to diplomats, and created all these characters that told that story of this really complex, fascinating place where at the time like a fifth of America's foreign oil was sourced, and it was a big story. And then I did a show called The Real Americans, where I traveled through small town in rural America for 3.5 months in a van and just talked to dozens and dozens of people all over the country, off the interstates, out of the metro areas. And then I did a show, Border People, where I traveled to the southern and northern border with Canada, going on both sides, talking to migrants, talking to Border Patrol, doing ride arounds with them, talking to refugees fleeing to Canada. And then also, I was living in New York at the time, people who was on or across borders, both geographic or cultural. So people, the borders within our own country that we cross or don't cross.
Hmm.
And
And
yeah, it's always been this thing of going out and meetings, working as a journalist on some level, of like reaching out to people and saying, "Hey, I want to profile, I want to hear your story," and then sometimes just meeting somebody in a bar and they have an amazing story. But I'm always telling people I'm an actor and a playwright, and I'm working on a new play about this topic. And so the interesting thing is most people go through the world not feeling heard or understood on very much a profound level at all. And the gift of this work, and I tell my students, is if you do it right with curiosity, with integrity, with respect, you're offering somebody the chance to be heard and seen on
hmm.
a really full level. So that's that part. And then I get back and start listening, and I do a lot of audio recordings. I take notes, and I take some photos. I mostly don't do video. I'll sometimes do a little bit of video. And then I have to locate these different stories and people within my own body and voice. So sometimes it's really like that person, and then other times there's composite characters, or you know, and I have to be able to. I don't. I'm uncomfortable with the term impersonating. I find what I try to say. I'm trying to honor the essence of somebody through my body and voice. But the goal as an audience is that you feel like you're meeting all these different people,
Mm-hmm.
and what you're seeing is not just them, but you're seeing this relationship that has happened, because you're
Mm-hmm.
learning about me through how they're interacting. And
Right.
people are always making jokes about sort of me and who I am and what are you doing here, and that's kind of part of the fun too, is like acknowledging that I'm here, I'm in this room, I'm in this relationship. So then the audience then kind of becomes me.
Right. That's
And I think,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah,
You get to be you being them in a really interesting way.
exactly. And there's something I think powerful in, for an audience. I mean, the whole sort of gesture is this this huge humanization of these folks, and then it's sort of the sort of the request from the audience is, so now can we see each other in each other,
Right.
right? That's sort of the metaphorical magical trick of like, wow, we are all these different people, and yet, wow, if this person is able to summon some of that person, then how can I go around in the world and try to do that in some small way, and not just shout at each other
Mm.
and eyes each other?
I think it
Yeah.
taps into. I mean, we're all actors. Like we all love to put on other people. It's like it's. I've never thought of it that way. That's awesome. Now you use the visual a lot, so you use the mirror. Interesting in the audio because like Anna Smith, like when she came here, she nails that voice. Like the cadence. Is that a way in as well? Does it one time one
Yeah.
works better than the other? Or
Yeah. There's both. And there's times, I mean, there's times when, if I'm trying to play somebody that's, looks and talks so different from me, there's times when it's like, okay, it's not always going to be like, oh, this is exactly how this person sounds, but it's like you get the experience of, this is really, there is some channeling that's happened, there is some essence that's happening. And yeah, there it's voice, and it's a physicality too. The interesting thing is, we all learned like, oh, you're supposed to, as an actor, you're supposed to be inside out,
mm-hmm.
but I find that the outside in and the inside out, it happens at the same time, and
Yeah,
one pushes the next one forward. And like I said, when I start to, I'm in the mirror, and all of a sudden I can start to see oh wait, I'm seeing somebody else here. It allows me to go in and to own that and say, yes, I'm gonna take this on and try to be in service of the story.
yeah. That inside out thing's so interesting. It's like when I teach, people are always gauged in the inside, but the fact is, you just got to make the whole loop. And if you start on the outside, and there's some actors that are just amazing mimics, and so they see it, they put it on, and then they find the thinking in the interior. So I think it's a disservice to say it's always got to come from the inside out because it's like it really does. And such an interesting thing of what you're saying is the audience member. That's what you're doing. You're going from the outside and you're taking it in.
And
Interesting.
I tell people all the time that, people get scared of working in front of a mirror, and I'm like, well, that's what the audience, like, you have to know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, otherwise you don't know, and it's incredibly precise. If I'm playing
Yeah.
three characters in a barber shop, and I work with my director Aldo Billingsley, and he's saying, hey, the way that you're cutting this guy's sides, you're shaping him up here. If you're going like that, that's not how you do it. You have to go, it's
Yeah.
really precise.
Right.
And then when you play the other guy who's hunched over a little bit with this, it's like you have to be really nailing this so that the audience isn't going, wait what, they're going, oh, 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 and there's a bit of a magic trick to it.
Right. Well, isn't that director being able to see seeing from the outside? So there has to be a point when you let go of what you're of watching yourself, Like like when you're on stage, you're not thinking, well, what do I look
No.
like over there? You're like, you've got it, and then you go, and then the director can kind of shape from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, there's, I mean, it's funny because I did a talk back last night after the show, and somebody's asking, like, what are you seeing? What are you thinking? And I say, well, I really am trying to leave myself and just be completely in the moment. And like, I sometimes, like my stage managers, I sometimes have to say, like, I can't do a ton of just like chit chat before the show. Like, I'm really just
Yeah,
trying to summon all these people. And when I'm in the moment on the stage, it's just trying to honor them and just trying to give myself over, use the skills that I have, the craft that I have, but then, like, yeah, like you said, just be in the moment and be talking to the Dan,
yeah,
you know, who I no longer am trying to be at all.
yeah. It must be a real. I mean, and maybe not. Maybe you flow with it, but like it would seem at times kind of terrifying to portray someone who is alive, right? So you're basically portraying someone you've met, you've taken that in. How does that work? What does that feel like?
Yeah, I mean, the I think what comes across, and I've had several times where people have come and seen shows, and I think what comes across is the dignity of the portrayal and the act of love in the portrayal, and that listening and paying attention and observing, especially in our world where our attention is constantly being pulled at, it is one of the biggest acts of sort of surrender, of service. And that I hope that people will see that I'm trying to honor their story in the best way that I can. And so, yeah, there's times when I might have to shift the register of the person's voice a little bit because I'm a man and I need to make it a little bit in order. It's all in service of trying to have an audience be able to see a person that feels plausible. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not always like 100%, oh my God, that's that person. It's like, although there are times when that happens, there's times where, physically, I did one show where, and I did it in this small town where this guy was from this small town, and I came on stage and the entire audience went, I know who that is, before he
Mm-hmm.
spoke, just from the physicality, just the way he held his body, or the way I held the body. But it did. So there is that sense. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there is also, as an actor and a playwright, I do shaping. It's not 100% verbatim, you
Right.
know. There's times when I have to add in context or finish the joke that was kind of not quite said, or, I hung out with this person sometimes for several days. I generally go out and talk to people and then go back and then go out again, and then I have a 5 to 7 minute monologue or scene in which I'm
Right.
condensing all of this down. So there is some artistic license, some artistic process, and in general, like, everyone who's come and seen it gets that, and they get, like, okay, right, this is not a documentary. It's
Right.
not, you can create a film recording. That's not what this is. This is trying to adapt this into the theatrical medium and make it as powerful and impactful, and try to be truthful and honor the essence of that in the theatrical form.
That's fascinating. Are there parts of the theatrical form that this needs this, or it needs to go with certain tools and techniques?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I generally, I find that humor is always an important part of my shows, and I think the humor comes out of the truth of the moment, or the dynamism of the interaction, that relationship, how somebody sort of makes a joke at me, or the specificity in which they sort of make us, what are their pause words, what are there some those really specific things, or the moment where you can see them thinking
Hmm.
and having to, even maybe if they told the story before, they're having to go, well, wait a second, I haven't thought about this. That sense of discovery, and then that sense of, sometimes there's an interesting thing of like the context. I mean, there's like a line in the Margaret monologue where she says, and I don't know, maybe we should include this in there because I don't want to like kill the thing, but I'll say it to you. We can decide, where she says, I know these people. I'm not going to do the way I do it in the theater, but she says, I know these people, so I'm not some person coming in to stir up the pot like
Right.
you, and it lands as a funny joke because it's like, it's also taking the piss out of me,
Right.
and
Well,
just the,
yeah, you must
yeah,
have a
go.
real, true, honest approach because, I mean, for the South in particular, people coming in and judging and, creating the narrative around what is here is, I mean, it's been a lot of time that's been taking place. So, yeah, she's great. So, we're talking about Margaret Seidler, who everybody knows Margaret Seidler. If you listen to the podcast, we had a last season, we had a podcast, we ended the season with Margaret Seidler. Everybody loves Margaret. So, it will be really fascinating knowing her and like her story. In talking about stories, it's like, how do you have a structure? Do you let the story kind of emerge? Because that's the journalistic part, I think, that's really interesting. It's like, how do you decide what the story is going to be?
I let what I find, like I always go out with an idea and then I let
Mm-hmm.
what I find lead it. So I thought I was going to create a show about reconciliation.
Mm.
And I actually went to Colombia, the country, for 2 weeks to study their national reconciliation process after their, 50-year civil war. And I talked to all former militants and both FARC and paramilitaries. I talked to peace negotiators, journalists, cab drivers, everybody. Fascinating. Came back and I realized, wait a second, we haven't had that in this country. We're not, I mean, we did, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Uh, we're not at that point. And right before I went to Las Vegas. I hadn't been on a plane since the pandemic. I hadn't done any research. We had a second child during the pandemic. I hadn't been getting out, and I was like, I need to get my sort of research legs under me again. I went to Vegas, which is a short, cheap flight, and Vegas everyone in the country goes to. And I was like, I'm just gonna. And I met this woman in this bar, and she was like, reconciliation? We're not a reconciliation. The whole country? No. What are you talking about? And she had this amazing story, and it sort of shifted it. And I thought, okay, if we're in this place of conflict, I want to go to all these places where the big rifts in the country are playing out.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Florida, where the school board meeting showdowns were happening, and then I sort of stumbled into meeting Margaret, and I thought, wow, this is so interesting because she's sort of unearthing this huge, talking about this thing that is very sensitive. I met this guy who works in a very working class environment, and his whole thing, and he's a Christian and he's a democratic socialist and he's a Gen Zer, and he's like trying to figure out how to sort of connect with working class guys and get them to sort of think about things in a little more complex way. I went and talked to voting register organizers in Atlanta and profiled them for several days, and it ended up being all these stories of people who are working in the real purple places, the places where the assumptions are not uniform, not the hard red, not the hard blue, and they're walking the lines, and they know how do you have to meet people where they're at, and how do they do it. And Margaret does it with a sense of humor and a sense of, uh, and all the characters are doing it on some level very savvily. And that was kind of really inspiring to me. And so it became a show instead about how do people change,
Mm.
you know, at a time when we're really calcified and really locked into our sort of tribes and our teams. How do people change, and who are the people that are able to do that? So the show shifted.
Do you ever find, because it seems like, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but the theme kind of exposes itself over time.
Yes.
How many people get left out? Like how
Oh,
many?
so many, so
Yeah.
many. Like, I went to Nashville, and the interesting thing is people often ask, like, well, how do you get people to open up? Because people really do get vulnerable. And I say, it is surprising, actually. Most people want to talk, and most people want to be heard, especially when you show the care and the respect and the curiosity, the genuine, like, I'm trying to be in service. I want to hear what you really think and believe. People go, okay, well, cool, come on in. But yeah, there's like, I was in Nashville, or the suburbs of Nashville, and there's this group that were working on there was kind of some troubling stuff happening in this one school district, and they were trying to sort of like push some things forward. And they like invited me for this dinner, and they had this really nice dinner, and like it was like a half dozen just local people, but who had found themselves into these roles of kind of like working in the community. And we had this great dinner, and it was really interesting, and they told me all their stories. And at the end, this woman said, so did we make it? And I was like, wow, I was like, I don't, oh, I'm sorry, like I can't, it's not like, and I went back, and it was like, oh, there were all these interesting stories, but it didn't quite fit the overall thing. And so I sort of said, hey, thank you so much for your time. Like, there's another guy in Florida who had this fascinating story that I met at this. I went to a prepper conference,
Oh Lord.
uh, and met him, and he was just like so full of energy and had this wild story of, from the 80s, and how he had found himself at this prepper conference. And it was super interesting, but it was like, well, how he's not, what does this have to do with how people change, and what
Hmm.
it didn't quite fit. So that happens all the time. And then there's other times where, I went to this barber shop in Las Vegas because I heard it was a place where people talk a lot of politics. And it ended up being, and that was very late in the research, and it ended up being really fascinating. It's like this Latino barbershop in Las Vegas where they're making fun of each other and talking crap, but also talking politics, and busting my chops. And I'm like, wow, this is great. And there was several different characters who talked about how they had sort of changed politically. And you could also see just this the other subtitle of the show is Stories of American Democracy. And one of the sort of places is, how does democracy play out? So school board meetings, barbershops, bars, churches, all these spaces where are sort of the small d democracy, and kind of celebrating that Americans actually are really good at talking, and they
Hmm.
love to talk. And it's an incredible oral society, and they do it with depth. Because I've lived in, I was in Ireland for a while trying to create a show about that. And the Irish have huge gift of gab, but they'll often not tell you about themselves.
Hmm.
And America, I don't know, there's Twainian, Whitmanesque, there's something in our DNA. There's this thing where, like, hey, if we're two people, let's talk. What's your story, man?
Yeah. Have you ever found more than one show in a period? Like, could you go back and create another show with the other stuff?
I mean, I sometimes think about doing like B-sides or something, like, the deep cuts,
Yeah.
the ones that didn't make the cut. Like, how would I do that? Yeah.
So process wise, this is a lot of work, right? So it takes you a couple years. I looked at the website to kind of bring
Yeah.
the show together. How do you determine it's ready? How do you determine that, okay, I'm ready to take this out?
Well, I do a ton of, yeah, there's kind of like three jobs. There's the journalism job, and then there's the sort of the playwriting job, and then there's sort of the acting job,
Hmm.
and they kind of overlap a little bit. And then there's the workshopping it a ton in front of audiences. So I do a lot of workshop performances, and it just gets better and better and better. And then at some point you start to feel like, yeah, this is tight. This is a show.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that really interesting tension of like, I always really want to entertain my audiences, and I also want to move them, and I think my hope is that this show does both of those things. I'm on this whole campaign like make theater cool again. I think there's like actually amazing playwrights and theater that's happening in this country right now, and it's so contemporary and rich, and it's the best playwrights are also writing for HBO. All the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
people really love, like that's happening in the theater. I think sometimes people don't realize that. So yeah, I always feel like theater is a social tool wrapped in a sweet confection. So that's my whole deal, is like I want to make you laugh, but then I also want to hit you here, and so you'll leave the theater being like, and people tell me this all the time, like, wow, we talked about that for all night, and then the next day we were talking about it, or I still think of like, these words that some of these characters said that stayed with me. And I think that's that's the power of theater, is that it does the way it lives in me. We hope that then it lives in the audience a little bit.
Mm. You use that word character, and it's kind of fascinating because you have these real life people, but they become characters. To you, what is a character? Like, how do you define it?
I think it's the theatrical representation of an experience and a relationship that I
Mm.
had. And there's some that are composites, and there are some that are really just more one. But I like to sort of let people know that yes, it is a different medium than just a podcast, or it is a different medium than just a documentary film, right? And that there has to be this openness from an audience to be like, oh yeah, okay, I this does feel true to this person, even if it's not 100% just because I feel like you can do an imitation that is just like a spot on imitation, but it maybe can feel shallow. That's why I'm always a little bit uncomfortable with the term impression, because it can feel like, but I feel
Surface.
like if
Yeah.
yeah, it's sort of just like, oh, you
Mm-hmm.
just mugging or whatever.
Yeah.
I think the feeling that people have when they're meeting these people is that there's a real channeling of something deeper. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
only works when there is a vulnerability from both myself and from the people that I'm talking to. And so I'm like, I can never express the gratitude for the people who open up and share their stories enough, because it's just profound for me. It's one of my favorite things as a human being, is going out and connecting with somebody who you from a completely different place. And I think there's always like maybe one person who's like, well, how can you play all these people and stuff like that? And I sort of feel like, well, the reality is I've had over and over again where there's are these moments where you're able to transcend your differences and you just see each other as humans. And that's the ask. And I feel like maybe there's some people who just don't have that, and they haven't had that in their lives. And I think the show and the work and the process is really an encouragement and a celebration of that. Like, we're tremendously divided as a country right now. There was somebody who came to the show last night who works in politics, and she said, gosh, I feel like part of this work is like it is a path forward, because there is this deeply humanizing thing that happens, and you don't have to agree with everything that person is saying, but when you see them as a fully complex human being, you can't dismiss them.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So yeah.
So a lot of time out on the road. So you were where were you last night?
Last night I was just in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So this was just a local show, but yeah, I'm going to Joe's Pub in New York to perform there on Sunday. And then I'll be in Santa Cruz the weekend before I go to Charleston.
Yeah.
I'll get to take the show to Florida, which will be really interesting. I think Idaho,
Where
West Palm Beach,
oh yeah. Yeah.
the Kravitz Center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then where in Idaho?
Yeah, Idaho in like Sun Valley.
Oh, Sun Valley. Have you been there before?
I have. Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, it's great. A lot of time on the road, almost like do you do as much traveling as like a stand up? And even before, like when you do the research, you're away from home quite a bit.
Yeah, I've had to get really efficient because I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old and a wife who,
Yeah.
um,
Would
you
like you
know,
around.
so yes. So I do a lot more like going out for a weekend to perform as opposed to like long sit downs.
Right.
And in the travel part, I've gotten really good at going like for a week or 10 days and like, so I went to like Tampa area, and then I was in eastern side of Florida, then I was up in Charleston, and then I went to Atlanta. I did that like a couple times. Or I was like in St. Louis, and then I drove down through to Nashville, or it's all chunked out like a week or 10 days, and I can't go for 3.5 months anymore.
Yeah. Or do you book these on your own, or do you travel on
Yeah.
your own? Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's kind
You're
of
like a
like,
cowboy.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I get some grant funding, and I have some people that like support the work. So that's really important. But yeah, I feel like there's a really rich legacy of going out and trying to hear what the country is saying. And I think
Hmm.
there's something really, the embodied aspect of it is really unique. And I think it's a really interesting way for people to encounter people that they never would. So yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of, I sometimes will like, I mean, there's all these tricks of the trade where you can like rent a certain type of car, then they usually give you like an upgrade, and then it's like an SUV, and you can like you can camp somewhere if you need to. You fold down the back seats. Like,
Yeah.
um, I love the travel part, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always just like blown away, and it's always more complex,
Right.
and people are always more complex. And Charleston's actually a really interesting place that is
Yeah.
really complex. And I mean, Atlanta and Florida, and there's a story of a guy in rural Missouri. So yeah, I love connecting with all these different places. And I find, if you really come with that genuine openness and genuine curiosity, and people might be like, "Oh, you're from the Bay Area, what are you, a fruit or you're a nut, or whatever, and there's that stuff." But then it goes away pretty quickly when you
Yeah.
show yourself to be genuine and honest, and you can't fake real.
Yeah. Other than theater, is there a medium that you're interested in? Like, are you interested in audio realm or TV, film, any of that?
I mean, I yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of really good documentary film. Like I'm also, I think the thing that I what I sort of hang my hat on is that mix of nuance and authenticity, and the excitement of the sort of complexity and eccentricity of real people. So
Hmm.
that can be anything from like Steve James documentary about elections in Chicago, which is a fascinating sort of ethnography of all the different neighborhoods in Chicago, or a really like well observed, piece of, even a piece of satire that's really well observed.
Yeah.
I think to me it's just something that is truthful and complex, and the comedy comes out of the truthfulness, and then the pathos comes out of the truthfulness too.
Hmm. That's awesome. Well, I've got one last question for you. I'm going to try this in the podcast. You're going to be the first kind of guinea pig. We're going to call. So the name of our podcast is we call it Keep It Pure, right? When we say keep it pure, we're looking for something that's the essence. What's the authenticity? and what are you driving at to get to that? Is there anything in your life, could be anything, that you're really searching to keep pure?
Yeah. Geez, so many things. I think I'm searching to keep pure the notion that we can have fun, joyful, deep, profound connections with each other. And that's a huge part of the joy of being a human being. And I think it's foundational actually to our country. I think it's in the DNA of our country, that sort of de Tocquevillian democracy, this and we're always striving to have that notion of let's sit down and have a beer, let's like show me what your world is like. And I've had that's sort of for 20 years I've had these incredible interactions with people that often lead to long-term relationships. I'm in touch with people from 20 years of doing this. And I think connecting across the things that divide us in a way that is it's hopeful. And I would say I think there's something really cool about live communal performance to do that. I think it just is different. I like HBO Max too, but I don't feel the same thing after watching that content that I do when I'm in a room with a group of strangers and we're experiencing this thing. And especially I think this medium of journalistic theater is really powerful because it's like, wow, Zora Neale Hurston, you know, the great ethnographer, her in Their Eyes Were Watching God said, you got to go there to know there. And I really feel that. And so that's at the heart of my is I don't presume to know, but if I go there and hang out, I feel like I can. And I do think we are knowable. And I do think we can understand each other if we do it in the right way. And it takes work and intentionality. And it's also a lot of fun.
That's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Dan. It's been such a pleasure.